Jason, Bound by Flame has been one of the biggest roller coaster rides I've had this year so far.
That's good, right? Roller coaster rides are awesome.
Well, no.
Wait, did it hurt your back?
Yeah.
Did you throw up at the end?
May have thrown my back.
Did you pee on yourself while you were playing?
Yeah,
it?
that might have happened when we went upside down.
Did they kick you out of the park for defecating in one of the carts?
I don't. My lawyer has advised me not to talk about this. No, what I mean by that is that I started it up and I liked it, and then I hated it, and then I liked it, and then I hated it, and then I liked it, and now I'm like, I can't resolve those two emotions into being like, you know, about it. It's only I either like it or hate it. Like, but this is crazy because this is the sort of game that I would expect. Well, welcome everybody. We're reviewing Bound by Flame, and this is the sort of game that I would expect to see on the PC, right? Just some budget title that came to the PC that nobody had ever heard about before. Because it's developed by this French company, Spiders, that developed a few
French spiders.
Yeah, little
mustache,
little berets, little snooty spiders with little snooty cigarettes. But this actually came out on the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4 as well, which I find to be really weird, considering that. We've been talking for years about the death of middleware, of the kind of mid-tier games.
Yeah.
That is exactly what this is.
Yeah.
It's not an indie budget title. It's not a AAA title.
That, like, last week.
Yeah, it's like some kind of weird mid-tier game, and it is. It's like these guys looked at the success that CD Projekt Red had with The Witcher 2, and they were like, "We can do that better." Well, because it's kind of Witcher 2 meets Mass Effect, or I guess Dragon Age would probably be more appropriate. But this is the story of title character Vulcan, who is a mercenary.
Pretty badass name.
That is a good name, especially when you take that Greek mythological name and you throw it in with the medieval kind of fantasy setting. And he or she, because your character is customizable, is a member of the Freeborn Blades, a mercenary company that's protecting these guys called the Red Scribes that are trying to do something to stop these evil undead deadwalkers that are led by the Ice Lords. My God, there's so many names of things in here.
And a lot of it sounds like it's cribbed from other stuff.
Well,
or inspired by. Well, that's pretty common with fantasy, though.
I feel like we live in an age where, like, you're ripping off somebody.
Yeah.
You may not know it, but you're ripping off somebody.
No. You're ripping off Tolkien.
Well, it's
Tolkien or Elric.
Tolkien, Elric,
or
George
Conan.
R.R. Martin, Conan. They've got a bunch of undead ice dudes that are coming to kill everybody.
Exactly. Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
Anyway, you start the game as this character Vulcan, and you quickly become embroiled in kind of this fight to stop this undead army. And actually, there's a lot of cool little things in this. Like, they talk about the Dead Walkers and the Ice Lords and where they came from, and their origin is kind of interesting. Unfortunately, I mean, the game starts you with such a kind of here's a company of medieval mercenaries. They're fighting monsters on behalf of wizards. Like, Jesus, guys, like, seriously. And fortunately, it goes to some more interesting places from there as far as, like I said, the origins of that. And there's actually a bunch of places in the game where you start to see other parts of the world where I'm like, no. Let's stick with that. Not these guys. I want to go with those guys.
These guys are boring.
Right, because there's people that are far more interesting. Like, if you...
the game just tells you, and look over there, ninjas.
Right.
Moving on.
Well, no. What about the ninjas? So very early on, I don't really consider this to be much of a spoiler. Very early on in the game, your character, Vulcan, gets some powers from an unknown source, and you get hooked to this is in the trailers. I really shouldn't have to spoiler warning this stuff, but gets hooked up with kind of this weird entity that gives you magical abilities
Oprah.
that you didn't have before. Oprah, yes, obviously. Be magic. That's what it is. So, and from there, you're part of this company, and you're going to this town. You become embroiled in this larger war. You kind of get the objective of trying to stop these guys from overrunning the world, and that's kind of the framework of the rest of the game. The details, on the other hand, are really interesting. Like in Mass Effect style, you're able to pick up a bunch of other people for your party, and they're fairly well fleshed out. You've got Randival, who's this knight who talks kind of weird. You've got this woman this girl who's the son of one of the Red Scribes, or the daughter, of one of the Red Scribes, who hangs out with you. We saw Mothras, the
Lich Pimp.
the Lich Pimp. He is by far one of my favorite characters. We also saw Edwin, who's this kind of weird, skanky looking. She's got her boobs are pretty much almost completely hanging out. She's got like one pant leg and the other one's just hot pants. Like, and she's kind of this character of weird, questionable morals that is kind of. You remember in Knights of the Old Republic 2 how there was that terrible woman who just every time you tried to have any kind of moral like opinion about a thing, she was just like, well, wait a minute, what about this? Edwin kind of plays that role,
Devil's advocate all the time.
A little bit. Well, she's just like, you're hanging out with these guys and you think they're all good, but they're not. Look at what they've been doing. And you're just like, well, I don't know. Or I don't like you because you're slut evil or whatever. I don't know.
Don't use your sorceress slut magic on me.
But by far, the single greatest standout character in this entire game is Mothras. Like, he is well-spoken lich who's not like evil, and he's just a really, really awesome character. I really enjoyed. Like, I usually would just bring him along just because of the stuff that he said. So that stuff is, once again, there's some good stuff with the story in that they've done a few interesting things, and there's some bad stuff with the story and the fact that a lot of it is very rote fantasy.
Sure.
But now let's move on to the single.
You're the chosen one.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? It is worth noting. All right. I don't know if I'm being too sensitive about this, but you know that when I play games, I normally play with the female main character. Because I got my quota of dude characters in just about every. Actually, recently, I've been seeing enough lady main characters, I may go back to just roll the dice, hit the random button, and see what happens. But I started playing Bound by Flame with a female main character using one of the 3 different trees, using the heavy tree. Had a terrible time. Was ready to write this game off as a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Voice acting, awful. The combat felt sluggish and shitty to me. Mm-hmm. Then I went back and I restarted the game with the male character and with the male voice actors, more appropriate. And I started specking out another one of the trees, which we'll go into when we talk about mechanics. But suddenly the game was like way better.
Oh wow! Okay.
And part of it is the fact that I don't actually before we move on from character, it's worth noting that most of the characters in this game, their lines are like very traditional fantasy, like thou art truly the most brave warrior in the land.
Verily.
You know? And they're like being portrayed by kind of these stock British-esque actors and actresses, which they could be really shitty British actors, but a lot of times the accent just covers it up. I don't fucking know. Could be the equivalent of like, you know, Carrot Top, and I wouldn't know because he's got the Benedict Cumberbatch. Your character's lines seem to have been written by somebody completely different.
Yeah, for like a different genre entirely.
Like they'll be like, "Oh, verily, the fight ahead of us will be long and arduous." And your character's like,
"Fuck that shit."
Yeah, fuck that guy. He's a jerk. I mean, almost literally. There's one point where your character actually says that person's a jerk. I'm like, you don't hear the word jerk much in medieval fantasy. Like, he is a knave. He's a rogue. Most ungallant. But you jerk ass motherfucker. Like, you just don't hear
damn
that.
Cock jockey.
Right. So I gotta say that it's weird to say this in a review, but for the love of God, don't play as the female voice actress, because those lines combined with the kind of clunky delivery that the female voice actress does really just pulls you out of it, because everybody else is in this medieval fantasy world and you're talking like you work at fucking 7-Eleven. It's just strange. From there, let's talk about the combat mechanics, because there's a lot of really interesting stuff, and then there's a lot of places where the game just falls flat on its face. Like, so your character has 3 different, really 2 different attack modes. You've got a heavy attack mode where you wield a double-handed giant sword, and that mode, you've got a light attack, you got a heavy attack, and then you've got a kick, an interrupt, and then you've got a block, which you use with the right trigger button that you block. And this game, the combat in this game is very, very timing based, and it's very much like, in order to get good at it, you want to be timing every block or every dodge so that it's coming in right at the right time, because you get an auto riposte counter attack when you do that, which does a lot of damage. I started the game out with that particular thing because I like big, heavy weapons, right? Had a terrible time with it. So you have that one, and then you have a second attack lineup that is dual daggers, and it's more of like a stealthy. You can do sneaking and sneaking attacking. But then instead of the blocking, like when you have the heavy attacks, you want to concentrate on blocking right at the right time. You have a dodge where you're dodging out of the way. You just jump back. The game was like a whole different game when I just concentrated on using that tree. And this is weird, but once again, stick with me. Because this seems at first like a little bit weird and nitpicky, but I think that when I get to the end, most people will understand what I'm talking about. So when you're using the heavy attack setup, the thing that you want to time right when the enemy character is about to hit you in order to get a counterattack is block. And when I was playing this on the PC and even on the consoles, block was bound to the right trigger, like the R2 button, right? So when you're in the midst of a very fast-paced battle and that attack is coming in, you have to pull that trigger all the way in order for it to account that you blocked at the right time. Had a really difficult time getting my brain to do that. Like if it was the right bumper or just a button. Because in contrast, when you're playing the fast character, the B button or the circle button on the PlayStation controller is dodge. And so
how odd.
When you're hitting those attacks and everything, and here comes that attack that you want to dodge, you just slam that button real fast, like boom.
You'd think it would be 1-to-1.
Well, on the thing is that the ranger, the thief type, can also block. You can also hit the same button, the right trigger to block, but it doesn't feel like once I got into the hang of using the button of
the
dodging, I was dodging like just 24 hours a day. Like boss characters come and be like, "Oh, you'll be destroyed." I'm just like, "Man, you can't touch me." I just jump because when you execute a successful dodge, your character auto counterattacks. You don't even have to hit a button; they just jump back in and do a big counterattack. So when I played the game, I had a much better time. Also, that layout with the ranger or the thief style setup, right? That I just call it dexterity build, right?
Sure.
Can also you click in the left mouse button and you can stealth. You can walk in, you can get it behind enemies, and you get your first attack for free, and it does like triple damage.
Right.
So having and then the damage output seemed equivalent across. It was weird because the heavy attacks hit harder, right?
Right.
But there's also a stat that you have that's in your interrupt chance, your chance to interrupt the enemy's action so they can't act. Well, since the dexterity build had more faster attacks, I had a much higher chance to interrupt them when I was fighting them.
Oh, yeah.
So it kind of all panned out, except that it was easier to play with the faster style. You then have a third tree, and so each one of these trees has a different set of upgrades that you can put into it. They obviously want you to mix and match, but if you try to concentrate on only one tree, by the time I got to the end of the game, I had like one tree maxed out and then maybe a half dozen excess points put into the other two trees.
Okay.
But the third tree that you have is pyromancy's magic that you're able to use because you have a magic bar and a health bar. I only ever use the one that sets your sword on fire.
Yeah.
Because in addition to those three combat styles, you also have traps. You also have a ranged crossbow attack that you can do. So it's like
There's a lot going on.
There's too much going on, and the simple fact comes down to they don't ask you to choose between these different trees. They're all available to put points in at one time. So I focused on the one, and by the time I got to the end of the game, I was a fucking badass. I can't imagine what it would have been like if I'd only had a third of each one of those trees.
Yeah.
It
If you tried to balance it out,
Right.
Sometimes I'll make that mistake. Then what was it? Was it System Shock? Where
I
you
don't
had
know.
hacking.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you had like telepathy, basically telekinesis or whatever.
Yep.
And really, the best thing to do is pick one and stick with it.
Yep. But then it also comes up in an even different way because there's another weird thing because they have the three trees, right?
Yeah.
But you can't. There are no wands in the game. You only switch between the sword and the two knives. So I can't imagine playing the game by just using magic because your primary attack is still heavy attack and light attack with your weapons, right?
Yeah.
So it seemed like they could have used. It would have been nice if you could have either picked one of those, or if there had been enough different types of equipment, right? Like if you had used heavy armor with the heavy guy, or light armor and then like robes or something like that, like you do in a very traditional RPG.
Yeah.
But like I was using the Ranger, the super fast class. I had full-on plate armor the entire time because that's
Really?
just what they give you. They don't give you robes.
Right, a hood, a cloak, or
Right.
whatever.
They just give you armor.
It's a strange choice.
It's very weird. Now, on top of all this stuff, there's even another system where every single weapon and every piece of armor that you're able to equip, you can also go in and customize by slotting. Like armor has 3 different slots where you can slot in different things to add to, like, say you want to add to fire damage.
Yeah.
You want to add interrupt. You want to add just raw armor onto your armor or whatever. You can customize all that stuff, and you customize that with just a metric shit ton of loot that you pick up in this game. Metal and blood and leather and rocks and all this stuff, and then you combine them to make different stuff.
Carrying
and then
around this bag. What's in there? Oh, some leather pieces, some metal pieces, some rocks, stuff I found in the street.
So shopping cart. He's just pushing a shopping cart along.
It's got like a tennis racket in it, an office chair.
And so then you can recycle stuff out of different slots, and you can spec in different ways. You can create potions from nothing. You don't even have to go back to you can, if you don't have the materials that you need to make like a trap or something, you can even go in and buy those materials just directly out of your inventory. You don't even have to go back to a shopkeeper. They also have shopkeepers that you can deal with. They also have a whole tree, which in addition to getting, every time you level up, in addition to getting points to put into those different combat systems, you also get talent points that you can put into these passive abilities. Like there's one that was incredibly useful where anytime there's a treasure chest around, it starts making a noise that gets louder, like a metal detector or whatever. So there is a lot going on in this. And then you have which of the 4 or 5 companions are you bringing with you, and fortunately, you don't have to manage them. You can, but you don't have to.
But you can just let them.
You just let them auto do their thing.
So it's not like a careful selection of who's in your team.
Well, you only have one other person.
Oh, okay.
It's just you and one other person.
Okay.
So basically, you pick like, do I want a damage mage? Do I want a healing mage? Do I
Right.
want a melee attack?
Or do I want this
attack?
guy because he doesn't talk much and I don't want to listen to his shit the whole time?
Right. So from there, you've got a 3 main acts and then a last boss. And inside of those, if you just tear through the main story quest in this game, it's about 8 hours long, but you're really doing yourself a disservice because there's about an extra 10 or 12 hours of
if you really want to get your
side
money's
quests.
worth, yeah.
There is one thing to note where there is a real serious lack of enemy diversity in this game.
Oh, really?
It's weird because you start the game and you're fighting the Deadwalkers as undead,
Yeah.
right? And then you go to the first area, which is a swamp that's full of like weird mutant gas bags and like these kind of chittery
Sex chuds.
Right. There's one thing where there's just some barrels and then this giant dick monster with a mouth comes out of it and tries to eat you.
What?
I'm not even making that joke when it first comes out. One of the characters in your party is like, does that look like? And you're like, and your character's like a man's thing. Yes, or whatever. But then when you get to the third area, you come into this area that's Deadwalkers again, right? And then you go to the end of the game, and it's just one final boss. So the prologue, both Act 2 and Act 3 are all Deadwalker enemies the entire time. So you're just generally getting the same. I mean, you got a guy with a shield, right? And then you got a guy with 2 shields.
Right.
You got
Just
a guy with a big sword.
little variations
Right.
of the same thing.
Now that guy's got a purple magic on his big sword or whatever. It would have been nice to have seen. They add in a few different characters, and they do a thing that I really like where bosses that are early on in the game start showing up as regular enemies later on. I like it when games do that.
Yeah.
For the most part, though, they could have used a little bit more. There's also some really, I understand like level design is important. They don't want you just tearing ass through the stuff, but especially in the third act, there are some areas that seem like needlessly complex with a lot of little tiny running up this hall and down this hall where there are no enemies, right, the entire time, and you're just going back and forth over and over again.
Right.
They don't have like a teleport back to your camp spell, so every time that like you finish a quest where you have to go turn it into the people in your camp, you have to run all the way back to your camp.
Oh, jeez.
Loading times are pretty easy, so it wasn't really a huge deal, and your character doesn't have stamina, so you can just sprint forever. But the enemies do respawn, so you'll end up running across them over again and have to go and kill them. Art-wise, I think this game looks fantastic.
Oh, it was gorgeous.
It's a little rough. Some of the textures are a little rough around the edges, but like the art style seems like kind of an interesting cross between, say, something like Dragon Age and maybe like Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Where they had interesting looking characters. Like I said before, the voice acting on everybody but the main character was I thought was
really
great.
Good.
Or at least not offensive in any way, shape, or form.
Especially Mathras the Lich Pimp.
All of the actually, I'm gonna wait. Let's roll this back for just a second. There is I don't know if you realize this. Most of the music in the game. Okay, I haven't talked about the music. We don't need to roll it back. There's the tune, the main theme of this game.
Yeah.
That is like it kind of sounds vaguely Asian almost. Like it's kind of
like the band Asia.
Yes, yeah. Obviously,
Yeah.
no. It's kind of got this like very. It kind of sounds like something you might hear almost in like it's weird. It's like a cross between classical music and kind of more Asian style music.
Okay.
But it's got this one thing in it where it'll be playing this song, and it's got this little like. It's like some kind of percussion instrument that's being hit really quickly that makes it sound kind of like. It kind of sounds like static a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like a high drum that's being tapped like 6 times, like, and it happens in that one little thing just over and over and over and over and over again in the main tune to the point where it was actually irritating to me, where I was just like, that needs to be taken out.
Maybe it was some sort of operant conditioning that they were putting you through.
I have no idea. Yeah, they're totally brainwashing me to give this game a good review, and I'm resisting it. I'm like, it's like a Clockwork Orange, but I'm not falling for their bullshit.
The Manchurian Critic.
That's right. Let's see. There's no New Game Plus in this, which I found to be a little bit irksome because I wanted to go back and fill out more of the tree or try out, max stuff out.
Try to become a god, as Jeff always does.
There is, though, a reason to replay this game because there are a few different places in the game where you make choices. You make very much story choices, which I'm sure when I got to the end of the game, I was down one road and they gave me 2 different endings. And the one of them that I picked at first had a really long, like nicely set up kind of epilogue of what happens after the game is over. And then the other one, I picked it and it was just like, all right, game over. You're done. I'm like, all right. But I mean, I've even seen in screenshots that your character can look more evil. Like I've seen pictures of the character with like horns coming out of their head, like flame eyes and stuff like that.
Hell yeah!
And there are characters. Some of your compatriots go a little bit more in that direction. So I'm sure that there's going to be some change in it, which gives it a decent value and consider that it's $40 on the PC and $50 on the console.
50 on the console?
Oh, well, 50 on the PS4. I don't know if it's 49 on the PS3. But still, in this particular time, this week,
yes,
not next week.
Next week, you just take this shit back to amateur hour,
right?
Hopefully,
I don't know. It's a very flawed game. But these guys are trying, and you can see it.
Oh, participant ribbon.
See
Everybody gets a hug.
You can see it in there. You can see some glimpses of, like, if this game had maybe triple the studio time and double the development time and, like, double the development budget, and they could have polished some of those extra corners off, maybe added in one more extra act and threw some extra enemies in, get some more notable people to do some of the voice acting, like, this could have been a really fantastic game. It could have been something like The Witcher 2, or Mass Effect in a lighter context. As it is, it was basically like a mid-level development studio trying to make Mass Effect, kind of not making it. But I enjoyed it nonetheless. All this shit, I mean, I played 6 hours this game and then started the fuck over, and I still enjoyed the time that I had with it.
You were all over the place with this.
I know. When I first talked to Jason, I was like, "Oh, it's garbage." And then we played it on the dojo, and I was like, "I don't know, maybe this isn't so bad." And then I went back and played it, and I was like, "I'm really liking this." And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, "Those were all big problems." So I'm going to give this a 3.
Okay.
It's very
respectable.
Middle of the road. It's not going to win any awards. I'll probably forget about it by the end of the year.
I don't even know what we're talking about anymore.
You're like, is this the review for Wolfenstein? Have we even played that yet? But yeah, I think it's worth checking out. If for nothing else, than just so that all you guys know in the future about Mathras Ice Pimp.
Yeah, you got to check this guy out.